Okay, so follow along with me as I read. Christ heals at the Pool of Bethesda. We're on page 91, chapter 13. Many people today seem obsessed with it and by an interest in angels. Recently, there has been a widely popular television series called Touched by an Angel. Numerous Christmas movies portray characters' problems being solved by angels. And both secular and Christian stores feature all sorts of trinkets, jewelry, and other odds and ends that deal with angels. In fact, some people put more emphasis on angels than they do on the Lord Jesus Christ. And not all of these programs or products portray an accurate picture of the role and nature of angels. For example, in the TV series Touched by an Angel, the scripts always have the program end with the angels revealing themselves and accompanied by a heavenly backglow to be angels. Whereas in Scripture, angels rarely reveal themselves as such. Also, once the angel characters are revealed as such, the characters whom they were supposed to have helped have been sent to help hold them in awe. Whereas in Scripture, angels never permit themselves to be so adored, but rather turn all of the glory and honor to God. Great emphasis on angels has encouraged some people to treat angel-related objects almost as talismans or good luck charms. They seem to believe that if they carry an angel pendant with them or wear a piece of angel jewelry, that they will be divinely protected. Such objects become for them like a lucky penny or a rabbit's foot. John 5 tells about the activity of an angel. The Jews did put a lot of stock in the ministry of angels, and we know that God often used them throughout Scripture. In this particular instance, according to the tradition that had developed, an angel would appear unannounced at odd times and stir up the water in the pool at Bethesda. Whenever that happened, any lame person who managed to get into the water while the waters were being stirred, would be healed miraculously. We know that this healing was not done in the temple area, which might indicate that it was not officially recognized or sanctioned by the religious leaders. We have no record that they even came to help people get down to the water when the angels troubled them. Did the religious leaders really care about the lame people who were gathered there in expectation of and hope of a miracle? Notice, however, that when Jesus came to the Pool of Bethesda, neither did he help the lame man down into the water. Rather, he asked, "Do you want to be healed?" The man replied that there was no one to help him to get to the water in time. This statement shows the total inability of any man to save another man. Salvation must come by God alone. But Jesus required something of the man in addition to his desire to be healed. He had to obey Christ's command, "Take up your bed and walk." The man did not heal himself. Christ healed him. But his obedience brought the blessing, whereas Christ provided the power of healing. As Oliver Green has stated, his obedience proved his faith. How about you? When God commands something of you, how do you respond? Do you react by making excuses, or do you obey in faith? If you expect to receive the blessings of the Lord, you must exercise your faith by obeying. Matthew Henry wrote that those and those only can expect to be taught by God who are willing and ready to do as they are taught. So we're going to read verses 1 through 18. I'm just going to read it off the board here. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and the Jews went up to Jerusalem. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades, like porches. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed, to carry your mat." But he answered them, The man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. They asked him, who is this, the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who healed him. And was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. He was healing on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. This is why he's saying, God works on the Sabbath, and so I work on the Sabbath. This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father and making himself equal to God. In saying, God's working, so I'm working, he's saying, I'm God, I got to work too. And that's how he's making himself equal with God. So let's go over these questions, and you can write the answers as we talk about them. And then we'll just segue right into the lecture. Imagine that you were the sick man. What would you have be thinking when Jesus asked if you wanted to get well? Would you have expected what was about to happen and why? So what would you be thinking when Jesus said, do you want to be well? Of course. Duh, right. Of course I want to be healed. Is that what he said, though? No, it isn't. We'll talk about that. So would you have expected what was about to happen? No. He had no way, no understanding that would make him think that Jesus was going to get up and walk. He didn't even know who Jesus was. So he had no filter from which to think that. Verse 13 tells us that the man did not. Oh, I'm sorry, did I give you enough time to write? I'll give you. Verse 13 tells us that the man did not know who had healed him. What do you suppose the man thought had caused him to be healed? Yeah. Maybe the angel healed him, the angel that troubled the waters. Maybe he thought that Jesus healed him. Obviously, he didn't know that it was Jesus, because he's going to say as much to the Jewish leaders. It's really impossible to know what he was thinking. Why didn't he ask Jesus? That's the next question. I think he was so excited. Jesus said, take up your mat and walk. And I think he was just so shocked, so excited, so dumbfounded, that he didn't think to ask. That can happen to me. I get so in a moment that I forget to do something that is like obvious to everyone else. Oh yeah, I didn't even notice that. Yeah, I think in this case he absolutely would have been in awe. Well, yeah, we talked about that in the first hour. Yeah, Jesus healed 10 lepers, and only one came back to say thank you. The others were too happy, not with that they were healed of their leprosy, and didn't even think to thank Jesus. Kind of like that, just like I can walk, and walked away. Now maybe he did thank Jesus, and that's we can't know that. I don't want to be too hard on him. What seems to be the major concern of the Jewish leaders in the past? They're not saying, that is so great. You can walk now. What a blessing. No, they're like, okay, who is this? Who is it that did this on the Sabbath? Because we got to stop him. We don't want him healing on the Sabbath. And so that was their major concern, that Jesus was healing on the Sabbath illegally in their mind. Does this, meaning the response of the Jewish leaders, does it surprise you?
No.
No. Why not, Phil?
Because they're up.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning,
Yeah.
they're like, my way or the highway, you know? Yeah. Yeah, Jesus definitely wasn't doing things the way they wanted him to, and so they had it out for him from the beginning. They are going to find ways of getting Jesus. They're going to find a way, even though Jesus didn't do anything worthy of death, they're going to couch his sins, quote unquote sins, in terms that Rome can punish him. But that wasn't the real reason they hated Jesus. They hated Jesus because he was a lawbreaker in their eyes. He was blaspheming in their eyes, but mostly they were afraid of his power and his popularity, and they were afraid of an uprising. Um, so, so he was a threat. Some people argue that Jesus never claimed to be God. What evidence do we find in this passage that the Jews believed that he was claiming to be God? What does it say right here? Wait a minute. Nope. I went back to the beginning.
My father works on the Sabbath.
Yeah, and that's what made them so angry. And then John explains this is why they were so angry. Not only because he was breaking the Sabbath, they were angry about that too. But he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. They understood that. It's going to become even more clear in John 8 when Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am." It's a clear admission of Jesus that he is God. But then why was I taught in college that Jesus never claimed to be God? Liberal pastors, not pastors, liberal professors like I had, same problem the Pharisees had. They don't want him to be God. So they're going to say, even he didn't think he was God. Truly, obviously, Jesus knew he was God. So, yeah, he claimed to be God by saying, "My Father works on the Sabbath, so I do." Yes.
I think it's kind of funny that Jesus doesn't say directly, he says either a story or like kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny that they realized this kind of metaphor to accuse him, but all at once they try to help him because they realized
Yeah, and they also, I mean, they would have seen God as everyone, the father of Israel, maybe, but not just your father. And so the language was different enough that it scared them. It upset them. Okay, so we're going to take a little turn. I'm going to turn this light off for you. And then turn to the page with the teacher lecture. And we'll get started on this story. So we've just read this passage. Do you want me to read it again? Do you want to hear it again before you, or you think you're okay? Okay. It begins with the words "after this," and we're gonna talk more about this in a minute. But John skips through some things, like there are gaps in John, and so he omits some things. And so why is that? Why does he concentrate on Judea and Jerusalem and not Galilee? Remember his purpose. His purpose was, these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. So his laser-like focus is on Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is the promised Messiah. And so he is concerned with telling those stories that say that. This one does, right? We just read about that. That my father is working, and so I'm working. And the Jewish leaders understood exactly what he was saying, exactly what he was claiming, who he was claiming to be. And so that's one reason why John focuses on Passover and on Jerusalem, because much of what Jesus did there had to do with his messiahship. But there's another reason I think that he skips over some stories. Remember that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels, to see together. If you remember that word synoptic, to see together, or to see the same thing. And they tell a lot of the same stories. In fact, I think Matthew is like 60% or 70% of Matthew is also reported in Mark. And Mark, the Gospel of Mark, was probably one of Luke's sources for his gospel. So we've got these synoptic gospels that mostly take place in Galilee, and that tell those stories. Those gospels, those synoptic gospels, were written much earlier than John. Mark might have been written in the mid 40s, like AD 45, like just 12 years after Jesus died. And the others were written in maybe the 50s, maybe the 60s. But certainly all of them were written before the temple was destroyed by the Romans, and that happened in AD 70. So all of them were written before that. John is writing AD 85 to 95-ish. So he knows all of those books. Early on, those three books, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were put together and were circulated for people to read. John probably had scrolls of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. He knew the stories that were in there. He lived through them, right? And so he didn't want to rehash what the synoptic writers had already told. He wanted to tell different stories, and he had a different focus. So that's why the stories are different. But we can use the synoptic gospels to kind of piece together what else happened. But first, let's look at what we've talked about in John already. Now, this says the first year of Christ's ministry. I don't know. Maybe it is. Here's the problem. What does the first sentence say? After this, there was a feast of the Jews. Does it name the feast? The curriculum is assuming that's Passover. So he's gone from Passover to Passover. That might be right. But I'm not willing to say it's Passover because it doesn't say it's Passover. It could have been Rosh Hashanah. It could have been any number of the Day of Atonement. It could have been any number of other feasts, 7 feasts, I think, in all. And so we don't know how long it is. We know time elapsed, but we don't know exactly how long. So let's talk about what we've talked about already. And don't worry about the first year of Christ's ministry, just what we've looked at so far. So Christ cleansed the temple, that's in John 2. He meets with Nicodemus, that's in John 3. He met with a woman at Samaria, and he stayed with the Samaritans, and they came to Christ. That's in John 4. Also in John 4 is Christ's healing of the nobleman's son. And now we come to chapter 5 of the Gospel of John. So the significance of those words after this is that we know that some time elapsed. Maybe a little bit of time, maybe a lot of time. Sometimes we can tell how long that gap is. Sometimes we can't. And in this case, I think it's fuzzier. Even though your curriculum is really sure that it goes from Passover to Passover, and they could be right. The manly thing? No, but they could be right. So let's let the synoptics then fill in some of those gaps. So we have records from Matthew, Mark, and Luke that do that, and so I'm just going to give you some quick things about that. Jesus was in Cana in Galilee when we last saw him in John. He goes to Nazareth. And apparently he was not treated well. He was rejected. We know that from the synoptics because they thought they knew him. You're just a carpenter. You're not a rabbi. What makes you think you're a rabbi? You didn't even go to school to be a rabbi. How can you be a rabbi? It's kind of like when you know someone as a child, especially if they were like goofy and maybe not too serious, and then let's say they come to you and they're now they're a plumber or they're in IT and they're going to come fix your computer or something like that. Aren't you the kid in class that never paid attention? Did you pay attention in plumber school? I'm not so sure you paid attention in plumber school. You know what I'm saying? And so they saw Jesus simply as a carpenter, not as someone who could lead them spiritually. They had rabbis for that. And so he, and certainly they didn't think he was Messiah. So they got angry at him. And they actually took him outside of Nazareth to a high place, and they were going to push him off. But miraculously, they lost track of him, and he walked right out of the group. Now, is this where that happened? I don't know. I will tell you that Nazareth is back here, and this is a high place near Nazareth. That's all I know for sure. But there may be other high places. So this is looking west. So way off in the distance is the Mediterranean Sea. And this right here, you see that big plain? That's the plain of Armageddon. Heard of Armageddon? Big battle. I'm going to go to Israel now. Isn't that cool to think? Like Jesus is going to come down, and boom, all his enemies will be dead, and we'll go back up to heaven. Won't that be cool? So I am going to get to go to Israel. I don't know if it'll be before or after I die, but I am going to get to go to Israel, right? Someday. So I don't know if this is the point. And obviously, the paved roads. I don't know if this is the point that they took him to throw him off. But I know that happened, and it happened somewhere around there. And then he went up to Capernaum. He did kind of a tour of Galilee, and he went up to Capernaum. Capernaum ended up being his home base. In fact, Peter's house, and Peter's mother lived there as well, became his home base. Now, during this whole time, he's calling disciples. Now, he called Peter, Andrew, James, and John during this time. Now, you're like, they were already following him. Yes, there were a lot of people following him. He said, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, you're going to be special. And so you're going to follow me in a closer way. You're going to follow me in a deeper way. And so he gave them, they had been following him with others, but then these core 12 people, and they were the disciples. He had other disciples, but this was his inner circle. And so he put Peter, Andrew, James, and John in that inner circle. And he spent a whole lot of time with him, oftentimes in Peter's house. In fact, he healed Peter's mother-in-law. And then they did this tour around Galilee. And he did other miracles as well. And then he came to Jerusalem. Now, we don't know if he walked or if he went through the sea and then walked. I don't think it matters at all. But he goes to Jerusalem, and he goes to a feast of the Jews. We don't know which feast. So, but this particular story takes place at the Pool of Bethesda. So let's talk about the Pool of Bethesda. It was near the sheep gate. Now, Jerusalem had 12 gates. It had a wall around it. All cities did. And it had 12 gates. We're not sure where all 12 gates were. We know where most of them were, but some of them we're not certain about. And the sheep gate is one of those. The sheep gate might have been there But it might have been there. But notice it's near the Temple Mount. Why do you think it was called the Sheep Gate? It was the sheep that they would drive, or it was the gate that they would drive the sheep through that would become the sacrifices at Passover. So that's how it got the name, the Sheep Gate. And the Pool of Bethesda is very close to that gate. That's an approximation. Well, actually, it's not so much an approximation because we do have the remains, but it's the pool. The pool is somewhere near there, and it was a structure that was built to be protected from the elements. So there were these colonnades, these roofed colonnades, to keep the people out of the elements if it was raining or if it was cold, and so it attracted people who were sick, who were blind, who had any number of illnesses wanting to be healed. And it was called Bethesda. And you're going to want to remember this. The name Bethesda means house of mercy. Bethesda means house of mercy. Now, today we can still see the remains of the Pool of Bethesda. These are the remains of the Pool of Bethesda. Now, not all of this is the original Pool of Bethesda, because and it was discovered in 1888. The Church of St. Anne was being repaired, and as it was being repaired, they found this reservoir of water that they discovered underneath that. So this is a reservoir that was excavated in 1888. And on this reservoir, very ancient reservoir, was this drawing, or not a drawing, maybe a carving of an angel stirring up the water. And that's how they knew we found. And before that, I'm sure people were saying that doesn't exist, that doesn't exist. And then all of a sudden they find this old pool that has an angel troubling the water on the walls. So the pool of water is cut from solid rock, and it's about 55 feet long and 12 feet wide. So really big swimming pool, right? That's a big pool. And then it was approachable from this flight of steps that you had to go down to get to the pool. And it was fed by an underground spring. And that's actually what caused the water to be troubled, because the spring would gush at intermittent times. It wasn't regular. It would just happen, and then it would happen again soon, or it would take a long time. It wasn't like Old Faithful, but it was, shooting off at a particular interval. And so tradition held that when that happened, it was an angel that was stirring up the waters. Now, we know that there's a natural cause for that the spring is the natural cause. But they didn't know that. And so that pool became a gathering place for people who were lame, or they were blind, or they were ill in some way. And their spiritual ignorance, their ignorance of what was actually causing that water to be troubled, caused them to go to the pool so that they might be healed. Now, over time, churches were built over this, and then they'd get destroyed, and so they build another church, and then that would get destroyed, and they built another church. So today, you've got this mishmash of what was the pool, and then what are parts of ancient churches that were covering up over it. And I can't tell from this point what is what, but in there somewhere is the Pool of Bethesda. Okay, we'll go just a little bit longer. I know it's been a long day, but I'd like to get just a little bit more done. So what is the meaning of this incident? The meaning of this incident is that it reveals the grace and mercy of God. When the lame man told Christ about his plight, Jesus didn't rebuke him. He didn't say, well, have someone take you to the pool. What's wrong with you? Don't you care? And he didn't rebuke him for spiritual ignorance. You idiot, there's a spring under here that's doing that. He didn't do that. He revealed his own power and his own compassion and deity in healing them. The man didn't need an angel. He just needed Jesus. It's so true for all of us. And so John recorded this story to reveal the deity of Christ, as well as some truths about salvation, but mostly these were written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life. So we ask this with every lesson, right? We ask this with every chapter. How do we see the deity of Christ in this story? How does he show that he is God? Yeah, he heals a guy. That's something only God can do. Only God has that kind of supernatural power. Now, look, there's no mention of this man's faith. I don't know if he was a Jew, probably a Jew, but maybe he wasn't a very faithful Jew. But Jesus gave him the strength to stand. Now, listen, he did as Jesus said. So I don't know what his faith was like, but he did what Jesus told him to do. Jesus said, get up, and he got up. And he could have said, but I'm an invalid. I can't get up. He could have just not tried. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like that where this happens all the time at camp. Kids are like, I'm going off the zip line today. And they get up to the top of the zip line and they're like, no. And it doesn't matter how much we coax them. Come on, it's going to be fun. Go down the zip line. They're like, no, they're petrified, right? He could have done that. He could have refused. He could have said, I'm paralyzed. But so think about that. He didn't know this guy. Jesus was a complete stranger to him. And he still did what Jesus asked him to do. Look, if you were in a wheelchair and you couldn't move, and some stranger came up to you and said, come on, get up and walk, you'd laugh, right? But that's the situation we have here. And so it took some sort of faith for him to get up and walk. When a stranger said, get up and walk, he did. I think he did have some sort of faith that maybe what Christ was telling him was true. And then the other thing is that Christ had showed his deity in that he had authority over the Sabbath. Who created the Sabbath? God did. So God is the only one who has authority over the Sabbath. And Jesus says he has authority over the Sabbath. And so he is claiming to be God. And that's the part that the Pharisees realized. The Pharisees knew he was claiming to be God. Miracle occurred on the Sabbath. And to them, to do any sort of work on the Sabbath was sin. Even frivolous work, even carrying a mat. You couldn't wear a nailed shoe on the Sabbath. You could wear a sewn shoe, but you couldn't wear a nailed shoe. They had all of these picky laws for the Sabbath, and none of that is what the Sabbath was about. Sabbath was intended to protect people, to protect the weakest people, to keep overlords, to keep bosses from misusing the people who work for them or their slaves. And so they had, we'll pick up here tomorrow.